us from Melbourne. We've got the Attorney-General, Nicola Roxon, for the latest from the government. Attorney-General, thank you very much for your time. What representations are being made by the government to Japanese authorities on behalf of these three men?
Well, the most important representations that are being made are to ensure that their well-being is in order, that they're being held in appropriate conditions, and of course to argue for and request their release as quickly as possible. It is primarily a diplomatic issue for us, but we are, of course, also examining any other legal options that might exist. But this boarding occurred outside Australian territorial waters, so there's no automatic application of Australian law. In fact, with the laws governing maritime incidents, it's clear that the presumption would be that Japanese law applies, and we are therefore putting a lot of effort into our diplomatic representations being made to the Japanese government, but we will continue to consider all options, and our priority is making sure that those three men are safe and in good health, and we are in contact through our DFAT officials with their families.
Are your advisers telling you that there is any legal recourse, given this was, while outside our territorial zone, it was inside our exclusive economic zone, just over 40 kilometres from the coast?
Yeah, what the exclusive economic zone really means is that Australia has rights to exploit the economic benefits of that region, but it doesn't give us any sort of territorial rights or automatic application of our laws. It's actually treated as being within general international waters. Of course, we're pursuing that further and seeing if there are any other options, but our advice to date is that Japanese law will apply because these three men boarded a Japanese boat. And we understand why protesters take this sort of action. We also, as a government, want whaling to stop. But if people do take action, take the law into their own hands, there are sometimes limited or there are consequences, and sometimes there are limited actions that governments can take in response.
Surely, given it was so close to Australia, as you say, there are limited legal rights for these men under Australian law, but the government must have a compelling case to the Japanese, as I say, given it was just over 40 kilometres from the Australian coastline.
Well, absolutely. Our discussions with the Japanese government are making sure in the strongest possible terms that we want the Australian men to be returned to Australia promptly. We want to be sure that they're being held in good conditions and that they are safe and in good health. Now, of course, when they are so close to Australian waters, we haven't yet been advised whether this Japanese vessel intends to take the men back to Japan. Of course, we are representing our views most strongly that they should be released promptly and returned to Australian soil. There's a number of different ways that could be done, but those discussions are being given priority, and we hope that we'll be able to report over the coming hours and days as this unfolds, action that might be agreed between our governments.
Is it possible that the Australian government might prosecute the three men for trespass, for example, under Australian law as part of a deal with the Japanese?
Look, I'm not going to try to provide legal advice on the run. I think that is extremely unlikely, and we are not interested in taking action under Australian law against these men. This was not committed in Australian waters or on Australian territory. I don't have any advice that they're likely to have committed any laws that break Australian laws. Obviously, things may unfold. There may be more evidence and information that is provided, but our priority is twofold. One, it's to make clear our ongoing objection to the Japanese government about whaling. That's why we're taking them to the International Court of Justice to try to stop this process altogether. And of course, we know in the meantime there are people who feel very strongly about this and may take other action, but all citizens need to be aware that if you take action which might be outside the law and outside Australian law, then other laws will apply, and that may restrict the sort of legal response our government can provide.
The opposition has urged the government to get a customs vessel into the area to monitor any such conflict, and the opposition spokesman on the environment this morning says if the government had done that, it could have stopped this from happening in the first place.
Well, I think that that's a nonsense, really. Our government has taken action that the previous Liberal government never took. So there's a lot of noise now, but the fact that we are taking Japan to the International Court of Justice, something that was never done by the Liberal Party when they were in power. We did send a vessel down into the Southern Ocean to gather evidence for that case. That was a successful mission. I don't think people fully appreciate the vastness of this area that we're talking about. Sending a vessel down into thousands and thousands and thousands of open ocean, putting our personnel at risk in that area is not necessarily something that will be constructive and is not something that we're considering at the moment.
Is the government comfortable, just finally, Attorney General, with the Japanese whaling fleet, this vessel, lingering just, as I mentioned earlier, 40 kilometres from the Australian coastline, not in our territorial waters, but just outside?
Well, we've made very clear that this boat is not a welcome boat in our exclusive economic zone. We don't have the right, we don't have to grant them permission to be able to travel through that area, and so it's not something where we have the opportunity to prevent them, but we've made clear our view, and we made this known well before this incident, that the ship was not welcome, that we didn't think it was helpful, and that, of course, we continued our representations that we don't think whaling is an appropriate course of action to be taken. This ship, people need to remember, is not directly involved in whaling activities, but it's clearly providing a support role, and that may give us some other options if it was trying to come into our territorial waters. But our top priority at the moment is to make representations on behalf of the 3 men who are being held on the vessel and to see if there is a way to get their prompt release.
Attorney General Nicola Roxon, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.